Okay, let's just dive right into this. How does a nation holding the absolute winning lottery ticket of natural resources end up completely and utterly bankrupt? Today, we're unpacking an explainer on one of the most baffling and honestly tragic contradictions in modern history. We're looking at Venezuela, a nation gifted with unparalleled natural wealth, yet one that's currently going through a profound, multifaceted crisis that literally touches every single aspect of human life. And this isn't just a regional issue, right? It's a massive global cautionary tale about economic volatility and fragile institutions. We're going to explore the deeply intertwined history, the economy, and the political layers of Venezuela, digging into the historical records to understand exactly how this incredible paradox actually came to be.
To start, you really have to consider the sheer unimaginable scale of the paradox we're talking about here. We're talking about a country sitting on the single largest proven oil reserves on the entire planet. To put that into perspective, when you adjust those estimates for population, they're 10 times larger than Saudi Arabia's per capita. 10 times! That level of resource wealth should, in theory anyway, guarantee boundless prosperity for generations to come. Yet, the reality on the ground is a devastating 75% contraction in national income since 2013, basically wiping out 3/4 of everything a country produces, buys, and sells. It's an economic freefall of historical proportions. Just a really striking, terrifying contrast between absolute natural abundance and total systemic collapse.
Now, to truly grasp the magnitude of that lost potential, just think about the number $1 trillion. Between 1999 and 2014, the Venezuelan government pulled in a staggering $1 trillion in oil revenues alone. I mean, that is enough capital to rebuild entire nations from the ground up, entirely eradicate poverty, and fund endless state-of-the-art infrastructure. It's literally one of the biggest and quickest accumulations of wealth in recorded history. And well, that sets up the central mystery of our explainer today. Where on earth did it all go? How did such unprecedented, astronomical wealth lead to a systemic humanitarian collapse, without a war or even a devastating natural disaster?
Let's step back a bit to part 1, independence and strongmen. Long before the very first oil derricks were ever built, the seeds for today's complex crisis were planted deep in the soil of early independence. Actually, it all starts with the country's very identity. When Christopher Columbus arrived back in 1498, he saw these rich, ecologically diverse lands occupied by indigenous groups like the Arawaks and Caribs. Seeing their huts built on stilts over the water, he was instantly reminded of a famous Italian city, which led to the name Venezuela, literally meaning Little Venice. There's a bit of a dark irony here, though, because this tranquil, serene vision of natural beauty stands in incredibly stark contrast to the violent, chaotic history that would soon follow.
Because, that early tranquility absolutely did not last. The fight for independence from Spain was a remarkably bloody and chaotic struggle. Led by iconic, larger-than-life figures like Francisco de Miranda and Simón Bolívar, this wasn't some swift revolution. It was a prolonged, brutal war that completely tore the social fabric apart. The year 1814 was especially disastrous, marked by the unimaginably cruel Battle of Orica. This wasn't just a regular military clash, it was a devastating slaughter that completely shattered colonial institutions, leaving behind a massive power vacuum and birthing a highly fragmented, violently contested political landscape. And this violent birth established a lasting and honestly deeply problematic pattern. Back in 1800, right before independence, estimates actually suggest Venezuela was richer than regional peers like Brazil, Colombia, and Chile. They boasted this highly diversified and thriving agricultural export economy. But in the post-independence reality, political appeasement led to a massive, aggressive concentration of wealth. The victorious military generals essentially just monopolized the spoils of war, lucrative stuff like cacao, beef, and vast tracts of land, entirely for themselves. This embedded a deep patron-client relationship into the very DNA of the country's power structure. Wealth became inexorably tied to political and military favor. It's a structural flaw that frankly still fundamentally haunts the nation today.
Okay, moving on to part 2, the Black Gold Rush. We now arrive at the definitive catalyst that forever altered Venezuela's trajectory, the discovery of black gold. Everything shifted monumentally on November 15, 1914, with the drilling of the very first commercial well in El Tigre. Almost overnight, fueled by the urgent strategic energy demands of World War I, Venezuela became a massive geopolitical priority for both the US and European powers. Now, while early operations were heavily monopolized by foreign capital, the sheer volume of resources meant that by 1920, oil had completely eclipsed agriculture to become the nation's primary export. The agrarian society was officially gone, and the petrostate had arrived. The sheer explosion of that new industry is just staggering to comprehend. Production skyrocketed from 43 million barrels in 1917 to an astonishing 440 million barrels in just 7 years by 1924. This massive, unceasing influx of cash rapidly modernized the country. It built soaring skyscrapers in Caracas, sprawling modern highways, and eventually created a period of relative, glittering prosperity. It profoundly altered the social fabric of the country, basically creating the shimmering illusion of permanent economic invincibility.
But, there is a massive hidden danger in tying a nation's entire fate to a single, wildly volatile global commodity. A massive global oil boom in the 1970s flooded the country with even more cash, but it was immediately followed by a sharp, devastating price collapse in 1981. The resulting economic freefall forced a government to enact incredibly harsh austerity measures. And for a population now fully accustomed to an oil-subsidized way of living, the shock was just unbearable. This sudden desperation triggered the deadly Caracazo riots in 1989, resulting in hundreds of deaths in the streets of the capital. So the oil wealth had brought temporary prosperity, sure, but it also masked incredibly deep social inequalities that were now violently erupting right to the surface.
Which brings us to Part 3, the Bolivarian era.
Here is the political climax of our story, the rise of Hugo Chávez. Elected in 1998 amidst widespread social dissatisfaction and, frankly, anger at the political establishment, Chávez promised a radical shift. He called it socialism for the 21st century. A massive, sustained surge in global oil prices allowed his government to heavily fund extensive, redistributive social programs targeted directly at the poor. However, and this is a big however, at the exact same time, the state began to systematically dismantle independent regulatory agencies, removing vital institutional checks and balances. The government also maintained severe structural deficits, spending vastly more than it was actually bringing in. So why does this matter? Well, because dismantling institutional guardrails while engaging in massive deficit spending creates an incredibly fragile foundation, one that will inevitably buckle the very second those oil revenues drop.
The extreme political polarization of this era is perfectly encapsulated by the dizzying whiplash of April 2002. Amidst a crippling national general strike, the military temporarily took control of the presidential palace, forcing Chávez to resign. A new interim government quickly tried to privatize the state-owned oil corporation, which then led to immense, deadly street violence. Chávez ultimately returned to power mere days later, but this incredibly brief, chaotic coup plunged the entire nation into even deeper institutional distrust. It created this hyper-volatile environment where political survival completely superseded economic rationality.
So think back to that unimaginable $1 trillion in oil revenue we discussed earlier. The resulting fiscal policies, the massive structural deficits, and the deliberate erosion of state institutions produced an economic wipeout that is almost hard to fathom. Experts note that it was equivalent to 66 national bankruptcies compressed into just a rapid 4-year span, just an astonishing, unprecedented evaporation of immense national wealth.
That takes us to Part 4, a nation on the brink.
We are now looking at a humanitarian crisis on a scale rarely seen anywhere on Earth outside of an active war zone. National income down 75%. Entire families are forced to try and survive on merely $2 a day. There's been a staggering 90% loss of real purchasing income for the broader population. And tragically, we've seen a total collapse of the public health system. Previously eradicated deadly maladies like measles and diphtheria have fiercely returned. This is what we call a preemptive collapse. It's a completely self-inflicted disaster resulting entirely from institutional failure, lacking any foreign invasion or natural catastrophe to blame it on.
And honestly, when a modern society collapses to this severe degree, people simply have to flee to survive. Neighboring Colombia took the immediate brunt of the initial waves with over 1.4 million refugees. Places like Brazil, the Dominican Republic, and Mexico also saw massive, desperate influxes of people. There's a deep, tragic irony here. A nation that historically served as a beacon of stability, literally welcoming massive droves of immigrants from war-torn Europe and across the Americas during its oil boom, had rapidly deteriorated into the epicenter of Latin America's largest migratory crisis.
Recent estimates suggest that nearly 7 million people have now fled the devastation. To put that monumental figure in perspective, that is nearly a quarter of Venezuela's entire population, just up and leaving their homes, their careers, their extended families, all to seek basic survival, food and vital medicine in neighboring countries. This is definitely not just a localized tragedy. It's a massive regional strain that's actively reshaping the demographics, the economies, and the politics of the entire Latin American continent.
Plus, it's absolutely vital to note that this widespread devastation extends far beyond just the economy and the immediate human toll. The environment is suffering immensely too. Venezuela possesses some of the highest biodiversity on the planet, including parts of the Amazon basin. But the collapsing national infrastructure has led to rampant, uncontained oil spills, deeply contaminated aquifers, and entirely unregulated illicit mining operations. The toxic, unchecked footprint of this institutional decay is actively poisoning and severely threatening incredibly unique ecosystems and diverse wildlife that literally took millennia to evolve.
So what does this all mean? Venezuela is a land defined by the ultimate extremes, possessing the richest natural resources on the planet, yet currently enduring the deepest systemic collapse of the modern era. We have to ask, how does a country overcome centuries of deep-seated strongman politics and a historically fatal reliance on black gold? Can it eventually reconstruct its entirely shattered institutions to finally, at long last, realize the true, immense potential of its land and its people? That's the question we leave you with today.